Right, continuing with discussion of first units 2 and 3 for our first 9-week session for semester 1 of English 9A. We finished up with The Most Dangerous Game, and I got cut off there. The film actually cut me short, and I was already into Cast of Amontillado before I realized I had lost the mic. So I'm going to continue on with this. So for Cast of Amontillado, we had a lot of discussion with that. I know that Rosie and I discussed it a few times. Austin and Miss Medina, they talked about it. It's a tough story to grasp. It's a psychological thriller. It's an early example of the genre of horror. For those of you taking your notes, genre is, you can think of that as the word type, and it's usually applied when we say genre of music or genre of literature. In this case, the type of literature or the genre is horror or psychological thriller. We have Edgar Allan Poe giving us a great example of that. And of course, he's one of the earliest, and sometimes credited as the earliest example of both mystery writing and horror writing. There are earlier examples of that in the 15th, 17th centuries of horror, but this is probably the clearest expression of that genre in the early days. So, getting in the head of Montresor here, we have this psychopath, this person who's basically exercising his premeditation on how he's going to get rid of Fortunato. And Fortunato, we know, loves Amontillado, and it's this delicious wine that he just really enjoys. And of course, Montresor is going to take advantage of that and whisk him down into the catacombs and lure him down there, where he will wall him in. The idea here is, some of you said, "Oh, I wasn't too disturbed by the whole story." Well, I guess if you've been watching, Cold Case or CSI, some of these characters don't horrify you. But if you think about, this is an early introduction to literature of the genre of horror. The getting in the head of the killer is actually a new idea in literature at this time, and the way the story is written, from this first-person point of view of him explaining how he's going to do away with Fortunato, it is a good example of psychological thriller in the first person. So I hope you enjoyed that. Ask me more questions about it. The thing about Poe is he loves to throw in those $5 words, the polysyllabic words that are full of meaning and full of grit and depth, but they're also sometimes hard to grasp and understand. So if you lose the meaning while you're trying to just get the gist of the story, I could understand your frustration. So ask a lot of questions where we're going over these. So moving on from the Cast of Amontillado, let's look at a Lincoln Preface by Sandberg. And Rosie and I talked, I noticed Rosie's comments on the discussion board and in their journal about wanting to know more about Lincoln, because Sandberg gives us this very poetic example of Lincoln, very poetic, but also rather critical view of Lincoln. One of the things he's getting at is Lincoln's complexity. It's also a very poetic and beautiful piece. He starts off with that first and most famous paragraph. In the time of the April lilacs in the year 1865, a man in the city of Washington, D.C. trusted a guard to watch at the door, and the guard was careless, left the door, and the man was shot, lingered at night, passed away, was laid in a box, and carried north and west 1,000 miles. Bells sobbed, cities wore crepe, people stood with hats off as the railroad burial car came past at midnight, dawn, or noon. So we get this, and of course, in this case, Sandberg carries on that kind of poetic analysis of him while he's also being critical of him. So he uses the word despotic to describe Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus. So some of these things, as we reviewed in class, habeas corpus being the right to trial by jury, or at least the idea that you have to prove that you have evidence on the criminal, in this case going back to when we studied the Magna Carta and Runnymede. And of course, this is not unique in warfare. Presidents have done this, and our current president, actually George W. Bush, suspended habeas corpus for enemy combatants, as they're called. So was done during the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and during the War of 1812 when we see the Alien Sedition Acts. So suspending habeas corpus, well, it's often looked at as a very serious breach of our First Amendment, or our not First Amendment rights, but, well, not only First Amendment rights, but basic Bill of Rights. It's something that's done during a time of war, unfortunately. Or fortunately, if we want to win the war, depending on your perspective. So for going back over Sandberg's piece here, though, notice the vocabulary he uses and the fact that he's both critical and praises Lincoln throughout the piece. We then go on to looking at the let's see, we then went over to Martin Luther King, the poem and song by the U2, that was the Pride in the Name of Love, and we read the I Have a Dream speech. And here, obviously one of the most moving pieces of writing ever in the history of American arts and letters, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, but also for its historical import in doing something that Lincoln could not do with the stroke of a pen, that is bring dignity back to a people and give them the full, at least approach full rights for a group of people in the United States. So Martin Luther King's contribution to our country is as important as Lincoln in that regard. And we, of course, in studying that, we looked at not only the way he uses metaphor, but if we go back to this idea of this idealized figure being not as perfect as we'd like them to be, that comes up with both Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. So we'll discuss that more in class. Then when we got into the poems there, and just to recap, we did Slam, Dunk, and Hook, Spear Thrower, and Shoulders. You had these two poems celebrating that wonderful moment in the activity of being in a sport where you lose track of time. You're so engaged in the activity that you might be out on a summer's day playing football with some friends, and you don't realize the time and show up late for dinner and your parents are upset with you, or completely have this notion of the court or the field where you know exactly where you are on it and have mastered the sport in this fluid movement, and those two poems do that well. The third poem that they throw in there for you to compare and contrast is called Shoulders. Very dire, heavy poem, and it's about that guy walking across the street with his son on his shoulders, and his whole future is being transported across that wet street in the rain. Had some questions about that one. We'll talk about that one in class as well, but I want you to think about the crossing of the street not as the finite idea of just crossing a street or walking across it, but as the entire journey of the boy's life, and how certain decisions that the father is making at that moment are going to really have a huge impact on the boy's life thereafter. So we'll continue to discuss this. I'm glad to see Tremaine, Rosie, Ryan, Josh, Austin. Had great conversations with Christian this week. Will's catching up really well. Just want to see that you're more active on the discussion board, so I hope to see you on those. And I'll see you tomorrow in class. Bye.